To his neighbors and acquaintances in South London, Stephen Marshall presented a rather unremarkable, even friendly face. He was a man who could easily blend into the fabric of a busy city, a face in the crowd that you wouldn't look at twice. He was known to some as a personal trainer, a man who seemed to have his life in order, offering fitness advice and a ready smile. This carefully constructed image was his greatest tool, a mask of normality that concealed a deeply disturbing and violent nature. He projected an air of confidence and helpfulness, making it easy for people to let their guard down around him. It was this ability to appear ordinary, to seem like just another Londoner going about his business, that made his eventual unmasking all the more shocking. Beneath the veneer of a respectable fitness enthusiast lay a man with a complex and dark history. Marshall had dabbled in various lines of work, but his true profession was one of deception. He was a master manipulator, skilled at reading people and exploiting their vulnerabilities for his own gain. This talent for trickery wasn't just a personality quirk. It was a fundamental part of who he was. He could adapt his persona to suit any situation, becoming whatever he needed to be to earn someone's trust. Whether it was a friendly neighbor, a dedicated personal trainer, or a sympathetic confidant, Marshall played his roles with unnerving conviction, drawing people into his web without them ever suspecting the predator lurking beneath the surface. This public image was not just a passive disguise, it was an active strategy. Marshall used his outgoing personality to get close to people, particularly those who might be isolated or in need of a friend. He understood that trust is a powerful currency, and he spent years cultivating a reputation that allowed him to move freely and without suspicion. People saw what they wanted to see: a helpful man, perhaps a bit of a character, but ultimately harmless. This widespread misperception was crucial to his criminal activities, allowing him to operate in plain sight. The stark contrast between the man people thought they knew and the monster he truly was would leave an entire community grappling with the chilling reality that evil can wear a very ordinary face. The effectiveness of Marshall's deception cannot be overstated. He wasn't a shadowy figure who lurked in alleys. He walked among his victims in broad daylight, sharing pleasantries and offering a helping hand. This made his crimes all the more terrifying because they shattered the basic sense of security people feel in their own communities. The idea that a killer could be the man next door, the person you nod to in the morning, is a profoundly unsettling one. Stephen Marshall was a living embodiment of this fear. He demonstrated with chilling clarity how a charismatic and seemingly benign exterior could hide the most monstrous of intentions, a lesson that would be learned at a terrible cost by those who made the mistake of trusting him. Stephen Marshall's life was deeply entwined with the criminal underworld of London long before he became known as the Jigsaw Killer. His past was a patchwork of illegal activities and shady associations, painting a picture of a man who had chosen a life outside the law. From a young age, he was involved in the city's drug scene, not just as a user, but also as a dealer. He had a reputation for being tough and resourceful, skills that were highly valued in those circles. His criminal career also included working as a bouncer and an enforcer, roles that required a capacity for intimidation and violence. This background hardened him, desensitizing him to brutality and teaching him how to navigate a world where strength and ruthlessness were the keys to survival. His criminal expertise was varied and surprisingly sophisticated. Marshall had once run a business that specialized in cleaning up crime scenes, a grim profession that gave him intimate knowledge of forensic science and how to defeat it. He learned about the chemicals that could destroy DNA evidence, the methods for removing bloodstains, and the ways police investigators pieced together clues from a messy scene. This wasn't just theoretical knowledge, it was practical, hands-on experience in the art of erasure. This unique skill set would later prove to be terrifyingly useful, allowing him to plan and execute his crimes with a forensic awareness that few killers possess. He knew what the police would be looking for, and he knew how to make sure they wouldn't find it. In addition to his direct involvement in crime, Marshall was a known police informant. This placed him in a uniquely duplicitous position, playing both sides against the middle. He would provide information to law enforcement about other criminals to save his own skin, or to eliminate rivals, all while continuing his own illegal enterprises. This role honed his skills of manipulation and deceit to a razor's edge. He became an expert at living a double life, maintaining a facade of cooperation with the authorities while simultaneously betraying everyone around him. This constant state of deception became second nature, blurring the lines between ally and enemy, truth and lie, until his entire existence was built on a foundation of treachery. Marshall's connections were not limited to street-level crime. He moved in circles that included dangerous and influential figures within London's organized crime networks. He was ambitious and saw crime as a viable career path, a way to acquire the wealth and status he craved. His partner in many of these ventures, including his final, most horrific crime, was Sarah Bush. She was not merely an accomplice, but an active participant in his world, sharing his criminal mindset and assisting in his schemes. Together, they formed a toxic partnership, their ambitions and lack of conscience feeding off each other. This long and storied history in the criminal underworld provided the perfect training ground for the ultimate act of violence and betrayal he would later commit. Jeffrey Howe was, in many ways, the opposite of Stephen Marshall. He was a quiet and unassuming man, a 49-year-old kitchen salesman who had built a comfortable life for himself through hard work and diligence. Friends and family described him as a kind and gentle soul, someone who was perhaps a bit too trusting of others. He had a successful career and owned his own home in Southgate, North London. He was not involved in crime and had no connection to the dark underworld that Marshall inhabited. Jeffrey Howe was simply an ordinary man, content with his life, who had the profound misfortune of crossing paths with a predator who saw him not as a person, but as an opportunity. The relationship between Howe and Marshall began under the guise of tenancy. In 2008, Howe's life took a turn when his business began to struggle, and he found himself in need of extra income. He decided to rent out rooms in his comfortable suburban house. Stephen Marshall, with his charming and confident demeanor, presented himself as the perfect tenant. He moved in, and for a time, the arrangement seemed to work. Howe, likely lonely and appreciative of the company, came to see Marshall as a friend. He was unaware that the man sharing his home was not a friend at all, but a wolf in sheep's clothing, patiently waiting for the right moment to strike. Marshall systematically and deliberately worked to isolate Jeffrey Howe from his friends and family. This is a classic tactic of manipulators and abusers, designed to make the victim entirely dependent on them. Marshall would intercept phone calls and make excuses for why Howe couldn't come to the phone or meet up with people. He slowly created a barrier around Howe, cutting him off from his support network. To the outside world, it might have seemed that Howe was simply becoming more reclusive. In reality, he was being ensnared in a web of control, with Marshall positioning himself as the sole gatekeeper to Howe's life, all as part of a cold and calculated plan. The final piece of Marshall's insidious plot was to take over not just Howe's home, but his entire identity. He saw in Jeffrey Howe everything he wanted: a nice house, financial stability, and a life free from the constant hustle of the criminal world. His plan was not just to rob Howe, but to effectively erase him and step into his shoes. The trust that Jeffrey Howe placed in his tenant was his fatal mistake. He opened his door to a man who had no empathy, no conscience, and a single-minded goal of acquiring his assets through the most brutal means imaginable. Howe's friendly and open nature made him the perfect target for a sociopath like Marshall. The motive for the murder of Jeffrey Howe was chillingly simple: greed. Stephen Marshall coveted the life that Howe had built. He wanted his house, his bank accounts, and the comfortable existence that came with them. By March 2009, Marshall had decided that the time for deception was over, and the time for final, brutal action had arrived. He had already established control over Howe's life, isolating him from the outside world. The last step was to eliminate Howe himself, making way for Marshall to take everything. This was not a crime of passion or a spontaneous act of violence. It was a premeditated execution, planned with cold-blooded precision for financial gain. The friendship Howe believed he had was nothing more than a long con. The murder itself was an act of shocking brutality, a stark reflection of Marshall's violent nature. On the night of March 22, 2009, inside the very home that Jeffrey Howe had trustingly shared, Marshall attacked him. He stabbed Howe twice in the back with such force that the knife pierced his lungs and spine. It was a swift, merciless, and fatal assault. Howe, ambushed in his own sanctuary, would have had little chance to defend himself. The act was carried out by Marshall, but his partner, Sarah Bush, was present in the house. She was not just a passive bystander, she was an active accomplice in the plot that led to this moment, fully aware of Marshall's intentions and ready to benefit from the crime. After the murder, Marshall's immediate focus was on consolidating his gains. With Jeffrey Howe dead, he and Sarah Bush began the process of stealing his identity and assets. They used his bank cards, draining his accounts of cash. They began selling his possessions, from his car to his personal belongings, treating his life's work as a treasure trove to be plundered. Marshall even started posing as Howe, using his identity to convince others that Howe had simply moved away and left everything to him. This brazen impersonation was a key part of his plan, designed to buy him time and prevent anyone from raising the alarm about Howe's sudden and unexplained disappearance. The betrayal was absolute. Marshall had not only taken Howe's life, but was systematically erasing any trace of his existence while simultaneously stealing it for himself. He had used Howe's own kindness and trust as weapons against him, lulling him into a false sense of security before striking. The murder was the horrifying climax of months of calculated manipulation. It highlighted Marshall's complete lack of empathy. He saw another human being not as a person with a life, family, and feelings, but as a mere obstacle standing between him and a more comfortable lifestyle. The crime was a testament to the depths of his depravity, where a man's life was worth less than the contents of his house. After murdering Jeffrey Howe, Stephen Marshall was faced with a significant problem: the body. Disposing of a corpse is a major challenge for any killer, but Marshall had a unique and disturbing set of skills perfectly suited for the task. Drawing on his past experience as a crime scene cleaner and his knowledge of forensic countermeasures, he embarked on a gruesome process of dismemberment. The goal was to make the body unidentifiable and to scatter the remains so widely that the victim could never be named and the crime could never be traced back to him. He turned Jeffrey Howe's kitchen, the heart of his home, into a makeshift morgue and butchery. The process of dismemberment was methodical and horrific. Marshall used a set of saws and knives to cut the body into at least 10 separate pieces. He then wrapped each piece carefully in plastic sheeting, a technique designed to contain forensic evidence like blood and DNA. This was not the work of a panicked amateur. It was the calculated action of a man who understood exactly what he was doing. He knew that by separating the head, hands, and feet from the torso, he would make identification through dental records or fingerprints nearly impossible. His actions were a deliberate attempt to create an unsolvable puzzle for the police, transforming a human being into a collection of anonymous objects. The next step was to disperse the body parts across the English countryside. Over several days, Marshall and Sarah Bush drove to various locations, dumping the wrapped parcels in rural fields and laybys. A leg was left in Hertfordshire, an arm in Leicestershire, and other parts were scattered in a similar fashion. The torso, however, was packed into a suitcase and left in a field in rural Hertfordshire. This wide geographical spread was a strategic choice, designed to confuse investigators and delay the discovery that all the different body parts belonged to the same person. It was a chillingly logical approach to a monstrous act, turning the landscape of England into a macabre burial ground. The discovery of the first body part, the torso in the suitcase, sparked a major police investigation and a wave of media attention. As more pieces were found in different counties, the press dubbed the unknown victim the Jigsaw Man. The name captured the gruesome nature of the crime and the challenge facing the police. They were dealing with a killer who was not only brutal, but also forensically aware and cunning. Stephen Marshall had succeeded in his initial goal. He had created a mystery that seemed, at first, almost impossible to solve. He had reduced Jeffrey Howe to a grim and scattered puzzle, hoping the man's identity and his own guilt would remain buried forever. The investigation into the Jigsaw Man case began as a daunting task for law enforcement. With body parts appearing in different police jurisdictions across the country, the initial challenge was simply to coordinate the effort. The first major breakthrough came from the torso itself, found in the suitcase in Hertfordshire. Despite the killer's efforts, forensic experts were able to recover a small but crucial piece of evidence. A tiny speck of material found on the torso was identified as being from a specific type of rare Italian tile. This was a one-in-a-million clue, the kind of detail that can make or break a complex case. The police now had a tangible link, however small, to a potential location. Working with this clue, detectives began the painstaking work of trying to find a property with these specific tiles. Their investigation led them to Jeffrey Howe's home in Southgate. Upon entering the flat, they found what they were looking for. The kitchen floor was laid with the exact same rare Italian tiles. This discovery immediately linked the victim to the address. The police now had a name for the Jigsaw Man, Jeffrey Howe. The puzzle was beginning to come together, and the focus of the investigation shifted from identifying the victim to finding out what had happened to him and who was responsible for his disappearance and death. Once inside the flat, investigators uncovered a wealth of forensic evidence, despite Marshall's attempts to clean the scene. Using advanced techniques, crime scene specialists were able to find microscopic traces of blood and human tissue that had seeped into the floorboards and behind kitchen units. Even for an expert like Marshall, it was impossible to eliminate every single trace of such a violent act. These findings confirmed that Jeffrey Howe had been killed and dismembered inside his own home. The police also discovered that Howe's bank accounts were being used and his possessions sold, pointing towards a motive of financial gain and indicating that the perpetrator was likely someone close to him. The final pieces of the puzzle fell into place when the investigation led police to Stephen Marshall, the man who had been living in Howe's flat and was now effectively living his life. When they arrested Marshall and Sarah Bush, they found them in possession of Howe's belongings, including his bank cards. Cell phone records placed Marshall in the locations where the body parts had been dumped. Faced with the overwhelming and meticulously assembled evidence, Marshall's carefully constructed plan crumbled. The police had successfully pieced together the Jigsaw Man puzzle, not by finding all the body parts, but by following a trail of forensic clues that led them directly to the killer's door. With the evidence against him for the murder of Jeffrey Howe becoming insurmountable, Stephen Marshall made a series of shocking confessions that revealed the true extent of his violent past. He wasn't just a one-time killer. He was a man who had been involved in death and disappearance before. He admitted to his role in the death of his previous landlord, a man named Mario Comateo, who had vanished in 1991. Marshall claimed that Comateo had died during a confrontation, and that he, along with his then-partner, had disposed of the body. This confession opened up a cold case that had remained unsolved for nearly 2 decades, suggesting that Jeffrey Howe was not his first victim. Marshall's revelations continued, painting a grim picture of his life in the criminal underworld. He confessed to being involved in the disposal of the body of another man, a drug dealer, on behalf of a notorious London crime family. In this account, he detailed how he used his expertise to dismember the body and dispose of the remains, effectively making the man disappear without a trace. This was not a confession to murder, but to being a facilitator of it, a cleaner, who could erase the evidence of other people's violent crimes. It confirmed that his gruesome actions following Jeffrey Howe's murder were not a panicked improvisation, but a practiced skill he had honed over years. These confessions served a strategic purpose for Marshall. By admitting to these lesser crimes, he may have been trying to control the narrative, perhaps hoping for some leniency or attempting to portray himself as a man caught up in a world of violence rather than the prime instigator. However, the effect was the opposite. His admissions solidified his image as a deeply ingrained and dangerous criminal, a man for whom violence and death were simply part of doing business. The confessions provided a chilling context for the murder of Jeffrey Howe, showing it to be the culmination of a lifetime of brutality and disregard for human life. The police investigated these cold case confessions, but securing convictions for decades-old crimes without bodies or fresh evidence proved impossible. Mario Comateo's body was never found, and the case of the drug dealer remained shrouded in the secrecy of the underworld. Nevertheless, Marshall's words hung in the air, a testament to other lives lost and other families left without answers. The ghosts of his past served as a dark backdrop to the trial for Jeffrey Howe's murder, reminding everyone involved that the depravity on display was not an isolated incident, but the defining characteristic of a man who had lived his life by a violent and merciless code. The trial of Stephen Marshall and Sarah Bush began at the Old Bailey in January 2010, capturing the attention of the nation. The prosecution laid out its case with methodical precision, presenting the jury with the overwhelming forensic evidence that linked Marshall to the crime. They detailed the discovery of the body parts, the rare Italian tile that led them to Jeffrey Howe's flat, and the blood evidence found at the scene. They also presented financial records showing how Marshall and Bush had systematically plundered Howe's accounts and sold his possessions in the days following his disappearance. The narrative was clear. This was a murder motivated by pure, unadulterated greed. During the trial, Stephen Marshall dramatically changed his plea. Initially, he had denied murder, but faced with the mountain of evidence against him, he pleaded guilty. However, he attempted to mitigate his role by claiming that he had not intended to kill Howe, a claim that was contradicted by the brutal nature of the stabbing. He also tried to absolve Sarah Bush of any direct involvement in the murder itself, although he admitted she was complicit in the cover-up. This last-minute confession was a calculated move, but it did little to change the outcome. The jury had heard enough to understand the cold-blooded nature of the crime. Sarah Bush maintained her innocence regarding the murder charge throughout the trial. Her defense was that she was terrified of Marshall and had acted under duress, too scared to go to the police. However, the prosecution painted a different picture, portraying her as a willing and active participant in the plan to defraud and dispose of Jeffrey Howe. They presented evidence of her involvement in selling his belongings and using his bank cards. The jury ultimately had to decide whether she was a victim of Marshall's control or a cold-hearted accomplice. Her fate rested on whether they believed she was a pawn or a partner in the gruesome affair. In the end, justice was delivered. The jury found Stephen Marshall guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 36 years, ensuring that he would likely die behind bars. Sarah Bush was cleared of murder, but found guilty of fraud and of assisting an offender by helping to cover up the crime. She was sentenced to a total of 6 years and 9 months in prison. The sentences reflected their respective roles in the horrific crime, holding Marshall accountable for the ultimate act of violence and Bush for her complicity in the deceit and desecration that followed. The trial brought a close to the legal proceedings, but the impact of the case would linger for much longer. The case of Stephen Marshall, the Jigsaw Killer, left a profound and lasting impact that extended far beyond the courtroom. For the family and friends of Jeffrey Howe, the trial brought a form of justice, but it could never erase the pain of their loss. They were left to grapple with the brutal way he was killed and the horrifying betrayal by someone he had considered a friend. The case served as a devastating reminder of the vulnerability that comes with trust, and how a simple act of kindness, renting a room to someone in need, could lead to such a horrific outcome. The memory of Jeffrey Howe as a gentle, trusting man made the crime all the more tragic. For the wider community, the case sent a shockwave of fear and mistrust. The old adage that you can never truly know what goes on behind closed doors took on a terrifying new meaning. Marshall was not a monster who looked the part. He was a charmer, a neighbor, a man who blended in seamlessly. This fact forced a difficult and uncomfortable reckoning with the nature of evil. It challenged the comforting belief that we can identify danger by sight. The Jigsaw Killer case demonstrated that the most dangerous predators are often those who are masters of disguise, who use a mask of normality to get close to their unsuspecting victims. The investigation itself became a significant case study for law enforcement, highlighting both the challenges and triumphs of modern policing. It showcased the incredible power of forensic science, where a single, microscopic clue could unravel a complex and cunningly planned crime. It also demonstrated the importance of inter-force cooperation in solving crimes that cross jurisdictional boundaries. The meticulous work of dozens of officers, forensic specialists, and analysts who pieced together the evidence was a testament to their dedication. The case taught valuable lessons about investigating forensically aware criminals and the need for persistence in the face of what seems like an impossible puzzle. Ultimately, the chilling tale of Stephen Marshall serves as a dark cautionary lesson about the human capacity for deceit. It is a story about greed, betrayal, and the complete absence of empathy. It reveals how a veneer of charm can conceal a heart of pure malice, and how easily trust can be exploited. The echoes of this crime resonate in the public consciousness as a stark reminder of the hidden dangers that can exist in the most ordinary of settings. The Jigsaw Man case will forever be remembered not just for its gruesome details, but for the fundamental questions it raises about who we trust, who we let into our homes, and the terrifying reality that sometimes the monster is the one who smiles and says hello.